Hi, I'm Allyson Drake, and I'm the founder and executive director at Full Circle Grief Center. I wanted to share a workshop with you called Grief Across the Developmental Stages. As we are parents, caregivers, or professionals working with grieving children, it's really important to understand where they are in each developmental stage and how they understand the grief process. So thanks for joining me tonight, and I look forward to sharing this information with you. So I want to first start us with a quote that I think is really important when you're looking at grief work. And if you've been to any of my workshops or any of my groups, most likely you've heard this quote before. It says, healing from grief is not the process of forgetting, it is the process of remembering with less pain and more joy. So for those of us who are parents, caregivers, professionals working with grieving children, that's not, our job is not to take away that pain because we can't do that. And our job is not to fix it because, again, we can't do that either. But our job is to really walk with these children, support these children, listen to these children, and help them get to a place where they are honoring and remembering and talking about their loved ones with less pain and more joy. So let's discuss a few statistics first. 1 in 5 children will experience the death of somebody close to them by age 18. And this statistic really means somebody in their everyday life, whether it's somebody that lives in their house with them or that they are with or come in contact or communicate with every day. 1 in 5 children will experience the death of somebody close to them by age 18. And 78% of 11 to 16-year-olds have lost at least one of their friends. They've experienced the death of at least one of their friends and or a classmate or a peer in their school. And so when you're looking also at statistics about children and the death of a parent, 69% of children who lost a parent grow up still thinking about their parent frequently. Of course, that comes at no surprise. And that means around 8 million people, so children and adults, have suffered through the death of someone in their immediate family in this past year. And obviously, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. And so in our country, obviously, those numbers would be greater this year. What we hear from classroom teachers about students that have experienced the death of a parent, they typically have a hard time concentrating in class. They may withdraw, they may participate less, they may be absent. As parents, caregivers, it may be harder to get them to school. A decrease in their quality of work, and then less reliability in returning in their assignments. So children that are supported in their grief, children that have a caregiver, a parent that is right there with them, have a school, a teacher or a counselor or an administrator, they have a grief counselor, or they participate in their groups, or they have somebody in their spiritual organization that is supporting them. So it doesn't just have to be grief counseling, but children who are supported in their grief and do not feel alone in their grief. They're 9 times less likely to drop out of high school. They are 10 times less likely to get involved with substances and have trouble with substance abuse. They're 5 times less likely to complete suicide, and they're 20 times less likely to develop a brain disorder. So let's just talk a little bit about grief. And obviously, as we know, grief are those deep and painful emotions that we experience because of a death or because of a loss, actually. You can experience grief even without experiencing a death. There's a variety of different losses, obviously, that bring about grief. But I want everybody to remember that grief is different for everybody. Children, adults, members of the same family. Grief can look very different for everybody. And I heard a quote once that said, everybody's grief is as different as their fingerprint. And I truly, truly believe that. If you were a member of a family, member of a school, a group of friends, and you were grieving, most likely everybody's grief is going to look different. You'll have some similarities, but there will definitely be some differences in that grief. It's a high stressor. Grief takes a very long time. Research shows there's a big grief children's bereavement study done out of Harvard a few years ago, and they studied a large number of children for, I believe it was 10 or 20 years after the death of a loved one. an immediate family member. And one of the takeaways from that research study, it's a very rich research study with lots of information, but one of the takeaways is that children, especially teenagers, year 2 is often much harder for them than year 1. And there's lots of thoughts, lots of conversation around why that is. But just remembering, as we are supporting children, often year 1 is not the hardest time. It could be year 2 and even longer. It's an emotional roller coaster. And it obviously returns on holidays, anniversaries, birthdays, special events. We call them grief triggers. Sometimes grief just returns really strongly on days that we don't expect it. When we hear a song or have something that reminds us of our loved one, or a smell or something like that. These are just some examples of quote unquote normal grief. Like I said, grief is different from everybody, but just some ways that grief can manifest not only in adults, but also children. I love this visual of grief. We all want grief to be very predictable, very linear, and kind of go along this sort of checklist of, we've completed this task, we've completed this task, but unfortunately, that's just not how grief works. So if you've walked the walk of grief, the journey of grief, you understand that grief often looks like the picture on the right, with very scribbly, very messy, very chaotic. So grieving is definitely different for children than it is for adults. We have a lot of calls to our center of, I don't know if my child is grieving, or I'm not seeing the normal ways that grief manifests itself. And just the real reality is that grief looks really, really different for children than it does adults. Kids often show their grief instead of talk about their grief, or, many times adults, our grief is shown in sadness and tears and talking and sharing, but often for children, grief is shown in their behavior, in their play. They can be regressing in their behavior or play. And this is because often they don't have that brain development. They don't have that emotional ability to handle that significant loss, especially all at one time. So they may sort of tap their toe into the water and then pull back and go and play and be, acting, like they did before, playing and singing and doing whatever they do. And then you'll see their grief definitely coming out in different ways in their play. So again, no two children grieve alike. You could have siblings that are experiencing grief in a really different way. Children often grieve in doses and spurts, especially our young kids who are grieving. You'll see it just for a little bit, and then, as I said before, they'll go in their normal developmental play. Kids are really quick to blame themselves, and it can be kids of all ages. I definitely have lots of examples and lots of children that I've spoken with that have blamed themselves for a sibling's death, or for a parent's death, or for a friend's death, that they had just done something different, or they hadn't said something, or they hadn't thought something, then their loved one would still be alive. And that's really part of our job as caregivers and professionals working with kids, is just to make sure that we understand any feelings they may have around guilt or shame, or those sorts of feelings, to really understand if they are blaming themselves, and to help them understand that it's not their fault. Kids hate being different, especially with our teenagers. It's really hard to be that child in school whose mom or dad or sibling or somebody significant to them has died. And so just understanding that kids are really sensitive about being different, and helping them learn how to integrate that loss, and deal with maybe being the only child that they know, or only teenagers that they know that has experienced that death. And that's why a lot of times working groups and different things like that are really, really important for kids, because they're able to meet children or teenagers that have been through similar experiences. They may sacrifice their own needs. They may not talk about when they're sad. They may not share their feelings for fear of making mom, dad, other caregivers sad or upset. So just making sure that we are modeling appropriate grief behavior for children. So a little bit about birth to toddler, and I'm not going to read all of these. You can obviously see these on a screen. And I know many of you are coming to learn about a variety of different ages, but I tried to put in here a little bit of how they understand about a death, and what they understand, and then what their normal reactions are. It is all the research that has come out of the Harvard research study and many other bereavement experts. Children as young as younger than 9 months can definitely be grieving. You can definitely look at a child's brain development and their brain waves and their emotions and their reactions and their responses, and really understand that they do grieve. Many times it's looked at as abandonment, separation, discomfort when their routine changes, but they know something's wrong, and they know, that their person that was there taking care of them or that was with them and their family is no longer there. And so you'll definitely see some of their common grief reactions and responses. So how can we help that grieving infant or toddler that is grieving? We can keep their structure and their schedule as much as possible. We let them know they're protected, they're comfortable, they're safe. We help them learn how to self-soothe. And then we talk about their loved ones. We create a story box. We can document memories that they don't have about their loved one or that they do have, share stories and keep them for them as they get older. Provide lots of pictures of their loved one, talk about mom or dad or a sibling or grandma or grandpa, whoever's died in their life, talk about them, share pictures, even when they're little, and so that they can, they can remember and honor that person who died. So toddler through early childhood, we're talking ages 2 to 6, still not understanding the permanence of death, still not understanding exactly what death means, but understanding that they do have these memories, they do have these routines that involve their loved one. They, but may just not understand where that person's gone, or really may not understand that permanence of death. And so they may ask a ton of questions, and you may have to repeat those answers many times, which is really painful when you or yourself are grieving that loss as well. But we have to be patient. We have to be able to answer those questions. Again, kids this age may work out their grief. It may be intense. You may see regression in their behaviors, whether it's like wetting the bed or potty training, or magical thinking is often what they do, acting out things fantasy-wise. But you may see some heightened anxiety around separations with their loved ones. And so just being able to be patient with that. So what can we do? We can try to be patient. We can try to be emotionally available to the child. If they're clinging on a little bit more, or they're regressing in their behaviors, being as patient and emotionally available as that we can. Teach them what their feelings are. Acknowledge they have feelings. Name those feelings for them, and let them know that they can be heard and they can be supported by you. Modeling ways to express feeling. It's okay to cry in front of our kids. It's okay to tell them, mom's feeling a little sad today because I miss dad, and I would love if you gave me a hug. It's okay to model those behaviors and ways to talk about our feelings. And then obviously really important to answer any of those questions that they have around the death, and create those consistent and predictable schedules. We have something in our bereavement resource manual that's available on our website. I think it's called Child Speak, that we have printed into our bereavement resource manual about how to talk to kids about loss and how to explain things that are really hard around funerals and death and grief, and how to do it in a kid's language. So definitely take a look at that if you need some support with that. So middle childhood, those elementary kids, those little bit older elementary kids, they definitely understand that a death is permanent. It can't be changed, but they look at death often as a monster, a powerful monster, like a boogeyman sort of thing. And they will ask lots of questions about the death, about cremation, about burial, and they may ask them over and over and over. And so just being patient with those. What can happen with kids this age? You definitely could see shorter attention span, shorter concentration, trouble in school that they haven't usually had, maybe worry about their own health, maybe taking on some physical complaints that their loved one maybe had before they died, and then obviously clinging, and just being worried that their people, their other people may die as well. So I've listed for you some older children, pre-adolescent and early teens, understanding death, They can intellectualize it, but they may not want to talk about their feelings or may not want to process their emotions around it. They may have deeper questions, but again, may not want to talk about it. May ask questions and then be done with it. And don't be surprised, kids around this age can often make those insensitive comments about the deceased or the situation. And I think that it comes from wanting to understand the facts and maybe not wanting to deal with their emotions or their feelings around it. So just being patient with those, and obviously it's okay to let them know that it's not okay to make insensitive comments, but being able to be there and answer those questions for them. So those early teens, we get a lot of questions with our early teenagers or our younger teenagers with parents asking us, I don't know if they're being a quote unquote normal teenager and going through puberty, or if they're grieving. And a lot of times I say it's probably both. It's a really hard, challenging time when there's hormones and changes and often the struggles of middle school that are going on, and then there's grief. So they maybe will turn to their peers a little bit more, but they want us as parents and caregivers and professionals to be available. And they may be really fascinated with the physical and biological aspects of death. So just a list for you here, and I won't go through all of them, but some common reactions, emotional, physical, and mental, cognitive, the common reactions of our grieving teens. So just take a look at those for a second. And then this is just a summary for you about, if you're watching this, you may want to screenshot it or do whatever you can to keep this as a reference. We do have a reference very similar in our bereavement resource manual too. And it's, we got it from an author named Reader. And it just gives you a summary of the ages, different thoughts and feelings and actions, responses, and the ways that we can support and encourage them. So what are we trying to have children do as they are grieving? We talk a lot at our center about integrating the loss and integrating the changes that comes with that loss. So we're trying to help our children understand the grief, understand the death. We're trying to support them and stand with them while they are grieving. And then we try to help them commemorate and honor and remember their loved ones, celebrate their life, and face the things that weren't so wonderful about your loved one as well, and help them, how to digest that and process that. Another psychological task that we're working with children is helping them understand how to move forward, how to integrate that death, how to adjust to a new normal. And then looking at areas such as post-traumatic growth. How are they growing as a child? How are they growing as they get older, as a teenager and a young adult, as a result of this death and what they've been through? So our children that are a little bit more resilient during grief, those kids that have a strong social support system, they're involved in their school, they have a group of friends, they maybe belong to a team, or they may have a group of peer support through their religious or spiritual organizations. So just those kids that have some sort of support system already built in there. Kids that already have a higher self-esteem and a sense of self, so they can really look at and understand what they're feeling, both themselves and with supportive adults. The kids that have fewer daily changes, fewer daily just changes in their schedule and in their environment, the kids that maybe are able to stay at the same school, able to stay in the same house, and are able to have those fewer changes, and consistent discipline. That's really, really hard when you're a grieving parent or a grieving caregiver to provide that consistent discipline and that consistent structure. But it's really, really important for kids so they can feel safe and secure in their environment. We always encourage parents and caregivers to make sure their child is prepared for the funeral. What are they going to see? What are they going to hear? Is the service going to be full of laughing and music and stories, or being prepared for tears, being prepared for some emotional outbursts, being prepared themselves to feel emotionally, physically, the grief while they're there. So just making sure that they're prepared. And for younger children, I always recommend having somebody that's able to take them out of the funeral if it becomes just too much for them, like a babysitter or a family friend or something that's able to take them and take them somewhere else, during the funeral. Kids that are allowed and encouraged to stay connected to their loved one, sharing pictures, talking about them in social media, sharing stories with family, whatever it may be, but being able to stay connected, having a special piece of jewelry that was their loved ones, or some accessory or something like that. And there's kids that have parents and caregivers that are functioning well, getting support, and talking to them about their grief. So what we can do is be role models of healthy grieving. Obviously, talking to the kids about, in an age-appropriate way, what we're feeling. It's okay to let them see you cry, as I've said before. It's okay to talk to them about, mom's having a rough day, so I'm going to go take some time by myself. I'm going to go journal. I'm going to go for a walk. Whatever it is, just letting them know that you're having a hard time too, and these are the things that you're going to do to help. And then allowing them a safe and secure space that they're able to talk to you, and you're going to tell them the truth, obviously age appropriate wise, and you're going to provide them comfort. So just being the safe person to come to with questions, fears, worries, and you don't have to feel like that you can solve their problems. As we know as adults, as much as we want to fix their grief, we cannot fix it. We can just be there for them, and letting them know, I'm going to be with you. We'll deal with this together. I might not know the answer, but let's try to figure it out together. I was at a training one time, and the instructor said, in regards to children's grief, and actually I think this really has a lot to do with adults' grief as well. If it's unmentionable, it's unmanageable. So if we don't have someone to talk to, if we don't have someone to share that space with us while we're grieving, to ask those questions, to talk about dreams we may have, to talk about regrets we may have, whatever it may be, then it becomes really unmanageable. Our grief becomes really unmanageable if we don't have someone to talk to about it. Be careful of comforting kids, but giving them inaccurate answers to their questions. And obviously, based on your own religious and spiritual beliefs, your answers would change based on your religious responses around your religion. But just being careful about, saying things that kids may not really tangibly understand, like God wanted another angel for heaven. I have seen a lot of children get angry at this because that their higher power took their loved one away from them. So just being really careful about, based on your own beliefs, based on your own comfort levels, of how to explain, the religious aspect of grief to kids. Many people find religion to be really, really comforting, and I know a lot of children do as well when it comes to grief. But just being really tangible and really open and honest about how we're explaining death, and how we're explaining our different beliefs around death. Being careful about just being a little more conceptual. Grandma went to sleep and she's never going to wake up again. And instead of saying something like, grandma was sick and grandma died, because, I've seen a lot of, especially younger children, be really afraid to go to sleep because they're worried they're not going to wake up again. So just being careful about using age-appropriate language around death and dying. And then promising things like, don't worry, mom and dad are never, ever going to leave you. Well, that's really, really hard to promise that when we can't control sometimes things around our death. So just making sure that, you're saying things potentially such as, mom and dad do everything we can to keep ourselves healthy. We wear our seatbelts to keep us safe. We go to the doctors for checkups. And mommy's going to do everything she possibly can to stay safe and to stay healthy. Something like that, maybe, instead of making promises. So things we can do to help a grieving child and teen as we're wrapping up here this afternoon. allowing kids to maybe have a belonging, obviously age appropriate wise, to make sure that belonging can stay safe, but a belonging or something special of their loved ones, providing those memorializing activities on around birthdays, anniversaries, right around the funeral and the visitations or whatever ceremonies are happening around the death. Reading books together, especially if they're younger, about loss. If you're having a hard time finding the words, there's a lot of great books that we have on our website. We actually have on our website a virtual story time where we have some of our leaders and counselors reading those books too. If it's not something that's hard sometimes to get through those books without getting emotional. And so if it would be helpful if we have one of our professionals to read them, we have them there as well that you and your child could watch together. Teaching them ways to express their anger, teaching them what's appropriate and not appropriate behavior-wise when they're expressing their anger or their grief, making sure they're getting fresh air, monitoring what they're eating, make sure they're getting some activities, time with friends, things like that. And then help looking for signs of depression and different anxiety and different changes in their behavior and mood. And just listen. That's really the best thing we can do. So I know this is not live, so we don't have an ability to ask questions, but I wanted to share some of my favorite quotes. Grief is the price we pay for love, and that is definitely true. And then grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It's an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. It's the price you pay for love, and the only cure for grief is to grieve. So I wanted to just thank you for listening to this workshop. And as always, if you need any support, have any questions, feel free to reach out to us at Full Circle. Our website is fullcirclegc.org, and there's a contact us page on that if you need to help answer any questions or have any comments or suggestions for this workshop. If you're looking to get in touch with me directly, again, I'm Allyson Drake, and my email is Allyson, ALLYSON, at fullcirclegc.org. Thanks so much for your time.